If you've ever wondered what it means to speak truth when the world only wants your pain packaged as art, or if you've ever felt the weight of being both celebrated and silenced, or if you're drawn to poetry that challenges, devastates, and refuses to look away, then today's book just might be for you. Today, I'm reviewing Bluff Poems by Danez Smith. Welcome to Spencer Reads Everything. I'm your host, Spencer Duncan, and today we're talking about Bluff Poems by Danez Smith. I'll be honest, I wasn't very familiar with Smith's work before picking up this book, but I've been reading through the winners and finalists for the 2025 Pulitzer Prize, and Bluff made the list for the poetry. It was one of the finalists, and I also must confess that I don't pick up many collections of contemporary poetry without prompting, so I am grateful for the poetry suggestions that I get from the Pulitzer Prizes. It's one of the few times that I do fill in that niche of literature that I just don't generally deal enough with. However, before we dig into these poems, here is a brief bio of the author. Danez Smith is an award-winning American poet, writer, and performer from St. Paul, Minnesota. They identify as queer, non-binary, and HIV positive, and their work often explores themes of identity, race, sexuality, and survival. Smith grew up in the Shelby neighborhood of St. Paul, raised by their mother and grandparents with family roots in Mississippi and Georgia. Interestingly, Smith once struggled with reading, only to be inspired by a teacher who told them reading would allow them access to video game magazines, a small moment that apparently really reshaped this individual's life and their lifelong relationship with words. Smith earned their BA from the University of Wisconsin-Madison as a first-wave urban arts scholar and the University of Michigan. They are a founding member of the Dark Noise Collective, a group of poets of color known for blending performance, activism, and written craft. In addition to their books, their works have also been featured in poetry, plowshares, and across various digital and live platforms. Smith is the author of 3 major collections prior to this one. The first one was Insert Boy, second was Don't Call Us Dead, and the third was Homie. And then, of course, the most recent collection of poems is Bluff. Their accolades include the Lambda Literary Award, the Forward Prize for Best Collection, and the Minnesota Book Award, among many others. They co-host the popular poetry podcast at VS with Franny Choi and have performed everywhere from The Late Show with Stephen Colbert to poetry slams and university stages across the nation. As for this book of poems, we'll take a look at it. I will, unlike most of my other reviews, there's not exactly a synopsis or I can't really give you a quick recap of what exactly is going on. It's poetry, so there's certainly less here that I can reveal in terms of a storyline, which is obviously going to be the nature of most poems, especially contemporary poems. So I will touch upon some of the themes. I'll try to even name some of the poems. I don't plan on reading any of the poems. I will say that for a few reasons. One, I don't have the rights to them, and two, because this is actually a collection of poems where I think the visual presentation of it is really important. So I would recommend, if any of them sound interesting to you, go pick up this collection of poems and make sure you actually read how they wrote them out, because that is a big part of the way that these poems are being presented. And so that's one of the reasons why I can't really recite or share any of this poetry, but I will certainly touch upon what the major themes are and things that I saw. And I think that bio of the author probably gives you a pretty good idea of the types of things that it touches upon. So here is my general overview of the poems as I read them. This collection of poems is a fierce, lyrical reckoning written in the wake of artistic silence and societal upheaval. It emerged from the shadow of the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the trauma of George Floyd's murder in Smith's hometown of Minneapolis. This collection is deeply rooted in personal grief, as well as political rage and poetic self-reflection. It is a book that interrogates what it means to be a poet, especially during a crisis, and what it means to speak and to mourn and to act and to survive when language feels insufficient, which can be a real challenge for somebody whose whole purpose and their whole medium is, of course, using language. The collection opens with a searing series of anti-poetica poems in which Smith questions the utility and morality of poetry in a world that keeps killing Black people. These poems reject the comfort of metaphor and instead demand immediacy and honesty, exposing how even art can become complicit in systems of capitalism and racial violence. As the book progresses, the author explores the dual identity of being both agent and enemy, and as a coping mechanism, as well as just things to consider that are recurring themes in poems that are so embedded in trauma. So one thing frequently returns to is the idea of home, both the literal space of the Twin Cities and also the idea of home in terms of a black body as a contested spiritual space. One of the standout pieces, a long-form hybrid poem set in Minneapolis and St. Paul, traces the destruction of the historically black Rondo neighborhood through the construction of Interstate 94 and juxtaposes this with the militarized police response to protests following Floyd's death. It functions as part testimony as well as part archive. I actually found that this individual poem was well researched, and it's also a consequence that many cities with significant black populations suffered from infrastructure that was supposedly designed to help everyone, but it came frequently at a cost to the marginalized and minority communities. My home city of Richmond actually has a very similar issue in which bringing in interstates caused the breakup of what was once considered Black Wall Street. And so you are seeing a similar discussion of it in Minneapolis. We actually have seen that in many big cities. And so this poem and others like it function as part testimony as well as, like I said, part archive and also part cartography of generational pain. So interspersed throughout the book are also visual elements that I already referenced, as well as invocations of ancestors. That's a common theme. And there are some love poems, all of which balance the collection's rage with these moments of joy and tenderness, and as well as some romantic longing. And I will say that as much as there is anger and frustration throughout this book, it is obvious that the author also has other emotions, and having a book full of just angry poems probably would have lost its effectiveness if it didn't show the full range of emotions. In one poem, Alive, the author reminds us that joy and survival are radical acts. Well, in another poem, Jesus Be a Do-Rag, a very interesting poem, it playfully prays for protection and community and beauty. And you may, if your gut reaction was to feel like that was a bit irreverent, I highly recommend that you read the poem and that you get a better sense of how all of those different cultural and religious elements are being brought into this poem from an individual that has a very distinct perspective. A big part of the author's identity as being queer is in some of these poems, so some touch on his queerness as well as masculinity and interpersonal harm with some very raw vulnerability. The author is especially reflective about their own role in perpetuating harm, especially in one poem, The Slap. You can read that and you'll get that real sense of just how much the author feels responsible, even as the author attempts to have a more expansive and appreciative understanding for the individuals around them. They're still very much capable of identifying ways that they may be perpetuating, be it misogyny or prejudice or any wide variety of negative things that it can be really hard to detach ourselves from in a truly honest way. And so in The Slap, the author grapples with personal guilt and inherited violence, as well as the failure to protect Black women. It's a very profound poem. At its core, a book about artistic survival and transformation. So it questions the role of the poet in public grief, as well as it mourns the loss of community and safety, and yet it still challenges us to imagine better futures. The author blends formal experimentation, like collage and prose poems and altered lyrics, with unabashed honesty. And so in the end, it's a collection full of ghosts and flames and prayers and curses and songs and all things fleeting yet incredibly profound. And they're all working toward what the author calls a near new world. And I think that that gives it a powerful focus. This collection of poems is without a question a powerful and an emotionally intense collection. The power comes through clearly in nearly every poem, whether it's the rage or the grief that I think is usually used to define this collection of poems, or whether it is the fleeting hope or the emotional weight that is in many cases quite palpable. I must admit that as someone who comes from a dramatically different background than the author, there are certainly elements of this experimentation and this type of poetry that I can't fully understand, and that is okay. Not all art is meant to be understood by everyone, especially art that is born in particular frustrations and particular anger. And that's exactly why I'm grateful for collections of poems like this, because I do think it helps me get a little closer to better understanding individuals and their experiences, even if I can never fully understand exactly where people are coming from. I would say that reading this collection of poems feels like being invited to witness someone else's not just unfiltered truths, but also in a way their world and their perception of the world. And it also encourages you to sit with that world rather than try to explain it or reduce it to something overly simplified. I really appreciate the opportunity to listen and to read and to engage with these poems, because it certainly led me to reflect on my own place in the world and how easy it can be to look away from all kinds of suffering and to also miss real evidences of resilience that the author is explaining and exploring. And I would say that at its best, poetry can make us more empathetic, as well as more aware and more human. And I believe that this collection accomplishes exactly that. With that in mind, who is this collection for? It is for readers who value contemporary poetry, that speak directly to the heart of our present moment. So if you're drawn into emotionally charged or socially engaged writing, especially work that centers the voices and experiences of marginalized communities, this book will resonate with you. This book is for those that don't mind if their poetry confronts them, as well as unsettles them or pushes them into reflection. If you've lived through or paid close attention to the social and political upheaval, especially following George Floyd's murder, and you are interested in how artists responded with honesty and vision, Bluff is a great example of exploring that. So who is this collection not for? Well, it is contemporary, so I would say that the readers who expect their poetry to be tidy or maybe a little more abstract or metaphorical, or maybe just a little more emotionally restrained, this is probably going to be a little too intense for you, a little too blunt for you, and possibly a little too personal in a way that you just might not be comfortable with. And I would also say that it is unflinchingly political. There's no doubt about that. If you think you're going to take issue with any of the author's discussions about social issues, then this probably is not going to be for you. If you're uncomfortable with poems that include some raw language, which at times includes some racial slurs, some just harsh language, as well as some swear words, as well as poetry that critiques American institutions or demands some kind of reckoning with race or gender or queerness or violence, then this may not be the collection for you either. It may also not appeal to those who are unfamiliar with or uninterested in the contemporary poetry landscape. This is not classic verse or easy reading reflection. It demands something of the reader, not just in terms of trying to understand what the author is trying to convey emotionally, but it also demands something of the reader in terms of simply trying to interpret what you're looking at visually, lyrically, in all regards. And I would say that that's an element of contemporary poetry that if you do not care for, then you're not going to care for this collection either. All in all, I would say that Bluff is a visceral as well as a brave and an uncompromising collection that challenges the reader to bear witness to pain and to injustice, but also to joy and to survival. It is not easy reading, and it is not for everyone, but it can be incredibly profound for those that are seeking out something like this and are prepared for some of the rougher elements in terms of the bluntness, the language, and some categories and topics that almost everyone is going to take issue with. But even when the poems are difficult to digest, I would say that they also serve as a reminder of poetry's power to name and to resist, as well as to imagine, and sometimes, though not always, to help heal individuals. Of course, I would love to hear your thoughts on this book or other works by this author or other works of poetry that touch upon the upheaval of the summer of 2020 or any other contemporary issue that you would like to discuss. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you're enjoying this video or any of my videos, please share them with a friend, share them with family, colleagues, whoever. The more people that are aware of this channel and the greater reach I have, the more videos I am able to make. And I greatly appreciate all of your support. And don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on those notifications, and until next time, keep those pages turning.